I'm not the usual person. You guys are going to miss Steph, but that's okay. They'll be back for our next meeting, which will not be until next semester. But so today is a kind of an add-on meeting. We're going to do a recap of the semester, and we have a few guest speakers. So yeah, we can start with our link tree. If you want to see our presentations, YouTube, all of these, our meetings are live streamed on YouTube, and those live streams stay up. If you want to come to our meetings and learn about when we're having meetings and events, our email list, you can get that through a link tree. Basically, anything you want from us, follow that QR code to our link tree. So what did we learn about this semester? To start, or not to start, we started off in September with mental health and invisible illnesses. So we specifically talked about depression, anxiety, and medical PTSD and / medical trauma. In October, we talked about circulatory diseases. So specifically congenital heart disease, hemophilia, and median arcuate ligament syndrome, which is also known as MALS. And then in November, we talked about neurological disorders, specifically multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, and functional neurologic disorders. For the September review, mental health and invisible illnesses, medical trauma is real, something to really state. Too many doctors and medical professionals do not take their patients' concerns seriously, which not only delays diagnosis, but also causes physical and mental harm along the way. Additionally, mental illness is just as important as physical illness, and they often go hand in hand. And like when you're mentally ill, you're more likely to be physically ill, etc. When you're physically ill, you're more likely to become mentally ill or mentally worse. Just like other invisible illnesses, physical illnesses, or any other condition, mental illness is not your fault. It's not as simple as trying to be happier or trying to calm down. Mental illnesses are your brain functioning differently than it does standardly, or it doesn't the standard person. Generalized anxiety disorder is not just anxiety. It can be debilitating and extreme, and it's not like typical everyday anxiety. There are also many different types of depression with a lot of varying symptoms. And sometimes mental illnesses cause physical symptoms in addition to emotional or mental symptoms. So it's not an excuse for a doctor to brush someone aside, though. All opinions should be considered before a diagnosis is made. And lastly, be kind to yourself. It's like life isn't easy for anyone. And, treat yourself like you would treat someone else. For the circulatory conditions review, congenital heart disease, CDH, is where there's one or more issues with the structure of the heart since birth. CDH can be minor, or to severe. Can have no symptoms or many symptoms. It really depends on the person and what you have with your heart. Hemophilia is a gene mutation that severely reduces the blood's ability to clot. And again, it can be minor, moderate, or severe. It just depends on the person and what type you have and how that type works for you. So there are 3 types of hemophilia, A, B, and C.
I'm supposed to say types A and B are on the XY chromosomes.
Yes, so XY chromosomes, so that means they're sex-linked. MALS is a vascular compression syndrome, so it reduces blood flow to organs in the upper abdomen, and the only cure in quotes, because it's not necessarily a cure, it's surgery, but it can happen again and again, so again, not necessarily a cure. Neurological conditions. So neurological conditions are any condition that affect the nervous system. There are a lot of conditions that fall under its umbrella. Multiple sclerosis, MS, is an autoimmune condition where the immune system attacks the myelin sheaths that cover nerve fibers, causing communication issues between nerves and neurons. MS can lead to permanent damage of the nerves. Epilepsy causes seizures, but it is not the only cause of seizures, something important to note. And if someone is having a seizure, protect their head and call for help ASAP. Protect their head, because if they are seizing like they're jerking around, you don't want their head to hit something, and that could cause other brain issues on top of having a seizure, which is not great. And functional neurologic disorders are a condition that have an abnormality in brain function without any structural damage. So now we're going to go to our guest speakers. There's Gracie, Brandy, and Stormy, and I'll let them give a little more introduction about themselves.
Gracie, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gracie. I'm a sophomore here at Loyola. I'm a bio major, and yeah, I have epilepsy, so that's what I'm gonna talk about. Yes.
Brandy, you want to go ahead?
I'm Brandy, and I am from Alabama, and I was diagnosed with von Willebrand's at the age of 12. And right now, I run a support group for the women in the community with Stormy. And so I'll be sharing my story tonight.
And do you want to briefly explain what von Willebrand's is, since we didn't review that?
Oh, okay. So von Willebrand's is a clotting disorder like hemophilia. It's one of the most common, but it's the hardest to diagnose. Our factors don't work like they should, so we have to receive a clotting medication to help us form those clots.
Awesome, thank you. And then Stormy.
Hi, I'm Stormy. Excuse me, I'm in Georgia and I have hemophilia B. I was not diagnosed until I was 47. So I have a crazy story, I guess I should say. So it's been a very long road. And like Brandy said, she and I run a support group for women with bleeding disorders. And I also work for a specialty pharmacy, and I kind of specialize in women with bleeding disorders. And I do public speaking for a pharmaceutical company about women with bleeding disorders. So needless to say, I'm very passionate about that.
Awesome. So what is your experience like with your condition? And what was it like getting diagnosed? Gracie, you want to go first?
Okay, I was diagnosed, I think 5th grade, I want to say. And yeah, so I remember at first I had the first seizure. And then I remember I had a lot of EEGs. I don't know if you know what that is. It's super sleep deprived and they like stick all the stuff to your head. So I had a lot of those. And then MRI, they're just trying to figure it out because I had the first seizure and it was like, what's the cause of this? And then I started having more. So and then eventually they settled on epilepsy, I guess. But yeah, I just remember a lot of EEGs that had a lot of those done.
What about you, Brandy?
So I was diagnosed when I was 12 years old. I had started my menstrual cycle and I never stopped. It was extremely heavy. And so luckily we were able to get the diagnosis fairly quickly because I had a brother who had passed away 2 years prior to another blood disorder, which they're not related at all. And so that was, it was pretty easy for me to get a diagnosis. And now we're just, struggling with finding the right, what's the word? I'm like struggling. The right medications and
mutation.
Options.
Yeah, and your correct mutation for the correct diagnosis for her.
Yeah, the correct diagnosis. Recently, I went to Las Vegas with Stormy to get genetic testing done because my labs didn't match up with what I've been told my entire life. And so now I've done seeing like 3 doctors and they all say something different. So we're struggling now just to figure out what it exactly is. So that's my struggles
Right.
now.
What about you, Stormy?
Yeah, for me, so I had a lot of issues growing up, especially around my cycle. And I mean, I would have like 47-day periods at a time. Sometimes I would stop for a day or two and start again. And I had laparoscopies for endometriosis. I didn't know that hemophilia ran in the family. I knew there was something wrong with a couple of older cousins who couldn't play football, something with their blood, but that was about all I knew. So I went through, just so many things, 4 miscarriages. I always had swollen ankles, especially really bad bleeding after I would lose a molar as a child. Just a lot of different issues. And so my son was born, gosh, almost 21 years ago now. And at 3, he was diagnosed after having his tonsils out and waking up 4 days later in a puddle of blood. And I don't mean a little bit of blood, I mean like a puddle of blood. So that freaked me out. And he was diagnosed. So at that point, I was told I was a carrier. They did not believe women could have it. They thought we were only carriers. And about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I was very involved in the camp for hemophilia or for all bleeding disorders here in Georgia. And I was, on leadership teams and just doing a lot, mainly locally. And I was working with the girls one day, talking about their disorder and how they treat and, just all name of medication and all this stuff. And they wanted to know what my levels were. And I'm like, I'm just a carrier. And they're like, well, you should have your levels checked. So I did. I went and had them done. And sure enough, I had hemophilia. And we have what's called hemophilia treatment centers, which we're working on changing those to bleeding disorder treatment centers. But it's a comprehensive clinic you go to. And so I went there and was very excited because I was told that I was diagnosed as mild hemophilia. And I was like, yes, they didn't call me a symptomatic carrier. I was so happy. But that actually meant nothing. They still did not really want to treat me unless it was an emergency or surgery. And it was a long road. And so I found a private hematologist, and then Brandy and I went to Vegas, had some more testing done. I found out that I had Ehlers-Danlos. I also have factor V Leiden, which is a clotting disorder. So I have a bleeding disorder and a clotting disorder. I had several other mutations like a platelet and a VWD that doesn't really affect me, but all of it together, it was recommended that I go on Prophy, which means twice a week I infuse myself with medication, clotting medication. So I've tried to go back and have a conversation with that team, and they still don't want to talk to me. So I just see my private hematologist and stay very involved and up to date on things so I can be very active in my treatment.
Good. So what helps your condition? What makes things worse? What makes things better? What treatments have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't?
For me, a lot of it has to do with like just kind of lifestyle stuff. So sleeping habits, stress, stuff like that. When I'm stressed out or when I get really bad sleep and stuff, then it like lowers the threshold for the seizure even more. So it makes me more susceptible to that. So I have to try to be good about getting good sleep and trying to not be super anxious and stuff like that, and then just making sure to stay regular about taking my medicine. And medicines at first, when they diagnosed me, they put me on one called Keppra, which didn't really work. It kind of helped. It was like lessening the seizures, but it really affected my mood. It really like changed my personality. It's just not, I was in middle school, it was moody. It was not a good thing. And so we moved off of that one to one that I'm taking now called Lamictal, which I think is antidepressant as well. And yeah, that one worked pretty well for a while. I went for, I think, almost 2 years without having a seizure. And then I had a breakthrough seizure. And I think it's just, I don't know, my body changing as I got older, you know. So I'm on 2 medicines now, the same one, Lamictal, and also another one called zonisamide. And yeah, I'm still having them, not as frequently. So I'm just, you know, working with the neurologist, the epileptologist and stuff, trying to get it all under control. But it's certainly a lot better than it was when I first started. And my mood is a lot better. Like, these side effects aren't as bad as the first one. So
Good. What about you, Brandy?
So with me, when I was first diagnosed, first they tried to put me on birth control to try to stop the menstrual cycles, and then also to find the right medication to work. So they did, they would admit you into the hospital, and they would do a challenge to see, you know, they would give you the medication, take your labs before and after to see if they raised your levels. So the first medication they put me on was DDAVP, and it's infusion, and you have to have a nurse come to your house to infuse you. It runs over 30 minutes, but that didn't help at all. And so they switched me over to another product called Humate P, which is a factor product, which has the VWG factor and the factor 8 as well. And that worked pretty well in combination with the right birth control pill. And that went really good for a little while until they stopped making the birth control pill. And we never could find one, you know, comparable to, you know, the one I was on. So I ended up having a hysterectomy at the age of 30 to alleviate some of my bleeding issues, because I was in ICU getting, you know, blood transfusions from all the blood I was losing. And so that was pretty much what we do. And I still do prophylactic treatment once a week with a new medication called Willate, and it seems to work pretty well for me. We haven't had any complications. It helps with any joint bleeds, micro bleeds, muscle bleeds, and then the bruising. We bruise really, really easy. So
What about you, Stormy?
Yeah, so for me, again, growing up and not knowing, my story's a little different. For my periods, which obviously were my first real concern, you know, did the typical birth control, a lot of laparoscopies, did 2 years of birth control without the placebo. So for 2 years, I didn't have a period. It was glorious. It was glorious because, you know, it's embarrassing when you're 13, 14, 15 years old and you stand up, you know, in class and there's blood everywhere. You never wear white pants. You know, you're afraid to go on a date because you don't know when you're going to start bleeding. And it's 47 days is enough, but when you're going through pads constantly and you're wearing a tampon and a pad and, you know, you're dealing with so many things and, you know, the anemia with it and just, it's just overwhelming. And but everybody in my family kind of dealt with that. So it was just normal for us. And you quickly learned that normal is not always normal. And then I think when I was in my early 20s, maybe 20 or 21, they put me on Lupron, which is for male, or not, it is for prostate cancer, which put me in menopause. And that was miserable at 20, 21 years old. I think I did that for a year. And then I got married and I had 4 miscarriages. I had 2 babies in between. And like Brandy, at 33, I chose to have a hysterectomy because it was just out of control. And, you know, I didn't want to go through any more miscarriages. And so two kids was good. And then after, I kind of have a weird, little bit of a weird story. I'll touch just briefly on not just a bleeding disorder with women, but how I feel like women a lot of times are just kind of pushed aside and not listened to, because I went to like 5 different doctors. My ankle stayed really swollen for about 3 years off and on. My family doctor didn't know what it was, x-ray, oh, can't find anything, keep going. Went to like an orthopedic and I'm told, oh, you're a young mom, you're just, busy with your kids. And I'm like, okay, I've got one swollen ankle because I'm busy. Okay, and you are busy. So you get frustrated and you quit going, and then it gets really bad. And I went back to another doctor and he says, I think you need more testing, but your insurance doesn't want to cover it. I'm like, okay. Then so they decided to send me to a rheumatologist because I had other issues too. And the rheumatologist told me that there was nothing wrong with me. I needed Prozac. And I was like, okay, because nothing causes swelling and Prozac's going to fix that. Okay, whatever. So a really good friend of mine just begged me to go see a podiatrist. And I was like, yes, I'll go. And they did an MRI and I had 3 tears in my tendon that I had been walking around with for 3 years. And so that meant I was having a bleed, which I didn't know at the time. And I did have blood transfusions a couple of times with laparoscopies and things when I was younger. And those should have been signs, but it wasn't. So once I got diagnosed about 7 years ago, I started originally on Benefix, which is a clotting factor that's an infusion. And it worked fine for me, but we kind of started getting out in the big world and attending national conferences, and Facebook came about around that time. And that's how I met Brandy. And now she and I are like really good friends. And so my son went to a camp and met this new manufacturer. And so we started Xinity because product obviously is different for B than it is for A and BWD. We all have different products, fewer products for B than A. B out of A and B is more rare. I think it affects 1 in 30,000, I believe, is what they said at a conference this past weekend.
I believe you're
and
correct.
So there's around about 5,000 or so, 5,000 to 6,000 of us in the US. So it's, pretty rare. So the medication works really good for me. I do twice a week. I will tell you that almost every time that I'm hard-headed or very busy and I push it back and I don't infuse, or I say, oh, I can wait 5 days or, another day and I'm just busy because I travel a lot. I was in 6 states in 8 days, so I travel a lot with my job at times. And sure enough, I, wake up with a bleed. I had a jaw bleed, or I'll be walking down the steps and just step the wrong way. And now I've got an ankle bleed. And I had my first knee bleed in June. And ever since then, my knee has just not been right. So just one bleed can cause damage. And that's something that as a woman, we're constantly fighting about, is that, you don't want the men to have a bleed. And why is it okay for us? I know women my age, I'm 54 now. I know women my age that have had to have joint replacements already from, growing up and being told they can't have it and finding out now they do. So it's been a long road.
And since Brandy brought it up, I'm sure since you have both Ehlers-Danlos and hemophilia, your bruising must be pretty extreme.
It's interesting. I don't bruise that bad. I mean, I do bruise and I go in cycles. My sister, who is also diagnosed with both, she bruises horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then my daughter, we found out that my daughter has 4 Ehlers-Danlos mutations plus the hypermobility, and her bruising, yeah, it's amazing. But it all just kind of makes sense now that I do bleed a lot more than I should with the levels I have, but it makes sense having the Ehlers-Danlos and some of the other things that I have. It makes sense why that's happening. And finding doctors who understand, you can't find one that really understands either one of them that great, and finding one that understands both is, way out there. So it's been a challenge, but I'm slowly getting answers. Like right now, I just found out I'm anemic and I have to start iron infusions. But I've been having all these symptoms that I kept putting off on Ehlers-Danlos or my autoimmune disorder. And now I'm like, oh, it's, I need my blood screaming for iron. That's what's wrong with me, so, but it's, slowly putting the pieces together, and it's just learning to, infuse on time, try to stay, the stronger we can keep our muscles around our joints and all, the less bleeds we should have. Treating as soon as you feel like you have a bleed. We're always taught, when in doubt, treat. So even if you're not 100% sure it's a bleed, but you suspect, you're better off. Our medicine's very expensive. Mine is about $1 a unit, and I take 4,000 units a week.
Wow.
So yeah. And I have all this medicine I take for my autoimmune disorder. So I'm sure my insurance hates me, but so sometimes you worry, oh, that's expensive. Do I really need it? But I'm learning that it's not going to hurt me, and my body is important, and I need to infuse even if I'm not sure. So again, just listening to our body and making sure we're not ignoring or letting bleeds go.
And for those who don't know, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a connective tissue disorder. So it causes hypermobility, and it affects the collagen. So it causes hypermobility. It causes issues with virtually the entire body, because almost the entire body has some part of collagen in it. So it causes a lot of weird things.
Yeah, like your tendons and your ligaments. And my son has digestive issues. He has teeth issues. My son, myself, and my sister all have the hypermobility and 2 mutations, and then my daughter has the 4. So we're a hot mess. I mean, when the hematologist called me, she told me I had more mutations than any patient she had ever seen, and I'm like, oh my God, stop looking.
Right. So what has your conditions changed for you guys? Like, what, for those who had a difference between before and after, what was it like?
Yeah, so like I said, I got diagnosed, I think, in 5th grade. So I still, I remember not having to deal with that before. And I feel like a lot more things I kind of have to be cognizant of, I guess, because a lot of people who have seizures have what's called an aura. So right before they have a seizure, they can kind of sense that it's coming on. I don't, though, which is unfortunate. So I kind of just drop. um, so I sometimes feel like it has taken a little bit of my independence away, because I kind of feel like I can't drive, which sucks. I used to enjoy, well, I still can, but it's just I have to, it's a lot more monitored, or I have to do it with someone else, like I would go rock climbing and stuff, and I like hiking and things like that, like things that I just have to be, a lot more, and it's just, I really have to think about stuff like that now, and I didn't really used to in the past. And sometimes I feel like it gets in the way of my academics. Like I had a seizure in class, which sucked. My professor was great. Everyone was, it like wasn't, but it just got in the way with, because it takes me out for a few days, and like I just, I missed a lecture, and that was on a test coming up, and like studying, and then I did that on it. And it's like sometimes I feel like it just gets in the way of things, which sucks. But I have to deal with it. What are you gonna do? So yeah, but it's just sometimes it's just frustrating, because I remember a time where I didn't have to deal with any of this, and then it just kind of started. So, but I'm working through it, and I have a lot of people around me, and a lot of people who are very supportive. So, yeah.
What about you, Brandy?
So my life before my diagnosis was pretty normal. I never had that I recall, I didn't have any issues. And then once I was diagnosed, I missed a lot of school, ended up having to go on homebound, which, if you don't know what homebound is, it's homeschool due to a chronic illness. And then, so I missed a lot of school. I ended up having to get my GED because I couldn't keep up because I was, bleeding so much. I couldn't keep up with the class. And it really, once I was diagnosed, I was told all these limitations. No contact sports. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I was kind of mad because prior to my diagnosis, I could do those things, but then you get diagnosed and they say you can't do anything. And then as I got older and got involved with the community, I realized that I really can do anything that I want to do. I just have to be more cautious. Is the risk worth the reward? So if I wanted to go, on a hike or a roller coaster, is that something I'm going to have a bleed from? If it is, then we'll pre-treat, just in case so I can do it. If it's something I really, really want to do. But I was very thankful that I had met the people and they kind of, and let my family know, like, hey, she can do everything she wants to do. You don't have to put a limitation on her. And so I really, really appreciated that. But then there were times where I also felt like, as an adult, I felt like a burden on my family because I would have all these issues and I would have to have somebody, take me to the hospital or, call an ambulance. And me being the only one in my family with a blood disorder that we know of, they really didn't understand, and they still don't understand. But I'm thankful for Stormy because I had Stormy come in. I had surgery last year and she took me to surgery and stayed with me. And that was great because she understood everything. So, because it's just the community, once you're in the community, that's your family. So I really appreciate all those people who I met that let me know I didn't have to have all these limitations and then I could do whatever I wanted to do.
What about you, Stormy?
I shared a little of obviously how my life was before diagnosis, but it was amazing to me. I think one thing that stands out the most is I always had a lot of hip pain. And I mean, if I would, drive 2, 3, 4 hours, I would have to like limp for a couple of days. My hip would just hurt and it would burn and just hurt me so bad. And once I started infusing, that kind of went away. I still have it occasionally, but so I think learning, like I love yoga. I haven't been doing it lately, but I love it. And when I was very active doing yoga, I could take my treat. And that's one thing we infuse at home. It's very important in our community that we learn to infuse. We have kids that learn at 7 years old. My son learned when he was 10. It's just a little needle, stick in your arm, push your medicine, because we don't want it to control our life. And it could very easily. My sister hasn't learned yet. And, scheduling nursing, and she travels and, and for me, that just wasn't an option, and poor Brandy, she has to have a nurse because her veins are so bad, but that's different, that's different. So for me, learning to infuse and just being able to go live my life, and because there's long acting products that can last anywhere from maybe 7 to 20 days. And there's short acting, which is what I take. I chose short acting whatever, because I like the freedom. I like to say, oh, I usually infuse Thursday, but Friday we're going dancing, or I'm going to karaoke. I might get another jaw bleed or whatever, so I can switch it up. So I like that freedom. I love knowing that if I'm traveling and I get a bleed, I have my medicine with me. I know what to do. We do get a lot of education on how to treat ourselves and how to take care of ourselves. So I'm very thankful for that. I think, was that all the question?
Yep.
Yeah.
What would you guys want a newly diagnosed or someone who suspects that they have your condition? What would you want them to know?
I think what was hardest for me, I mean, I got diagnosed in like middle school. So I think at first I was really kind of embarrassed, I guess. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't, want to, it was really hard for me to accept it, I guess. But I think the, I mean, it's hard to do, but the faster you do, the easier it gets because, that way you can let more people in and have more people to support you. It's nothing I have to be embarrassed about. If anything, it's better that I tell more people because if I do have a seizure, then they know why. But yeah, I think that was probably the hardest thing for me. And, for someone who is just diagnosed, I'd say, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's nothing to be like it's hard, obviously, but it's a part of you and it's fine. So yeah.
I would definitely second that. What about you, Brandy?
For a newly diagnosed patient, I would 100% tell them to, jump in, get involved in the community because that's where you're going to learn the most, and that's where you're going to meet other people who actually understand what you're going through. And that's a big thing, I think, because me and Stormy, we understand and we know what it feels like to have a bleed or if we need to take a break. We understand that, as opposed to somebody who doesn't and they're just like, you're complaining, there's nothing wrong with you. We can't see it. There's nothing, you don't know what it is. And so that would be my main thing is, get 100% involved in the community. And to know that, don't let your diagnosis stop you from doing whatever you want to do. Because, we have, the guy who climbed Mount Everest with hemophilia. So don't let it stop you.
Definitely. What about you, Stormy?
I might get fired up a little bit, but I'm gonna try real hard. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm gonna say what I have to say because it's so important. My first thing is if you're a female or a parent of a female, and you feel that there is an issue and there's something wrong, keep fighting. Don't stop. Keep fighting. Go to another doctor. It's okay to fire a doctor. You don't have to go to them just because someone told you to. Fire them. They work for you. Go find another doctor. It's hard because there's not a ton of doctors that understand our bleeding disorder, and financially that's hard on a lot of people. Not everybody, are able to go to Vegas like Brandy and I had the opportunity to. And but there are organizations and there's programs to help with that. But I wish so many times. I mean, I don't think if I would have been diagnosed way back when I had issues, it would have made a huge difference for me because they didn't think women had it and they probably would have just whatever, But looking back, man, if somebody would have just said, this poor child, I was a child. I mean, I might have been a teenager, but I was a child. And I wish my parents even would have, stood up and fought for me. But it was different times. And, I just went through so much, and I don't want another girl to have to be looked in the eyes and say, you've had your fourth miscarriage, or those things. So that's just so important to me, is to just really fight and believe in yourself, believe that what you're feeling is real. Don't let people tell you it's not. I was called a hypochondriac my whole life. And, even after I got diagnosed, I had family members who couldn't understand why at 47 I would start this medicine that I went my whole life without. And I'm like, If you get diagnosed with the thyroid issue at 47, you start medication. Why wouldn't, so I think just being confident in what you're feeling, and don't let them, tell you because you're a female that you can't have something. There's so many, I don't know if y'all know, there's a group out there called Remember the Girls, and it's, about X-linked diseases. And, just there's always somebody that you can reach out to, especially in our community. We have a community like no other. I mean, we really do. We have so many events, and we get to see each other 5 or 6 times a year because of big events that are sponsored by the manufacturing companies. But also just educate yourself, know what's out there, find a friend, and don't ever let your disease, I can't even talk tonight, define you, because, we are more than our aches and pains, but they're real too. So, make sure you're listening to your body, but live life,
I also second that. What
I should say, live life the days you aren't in bed resting.
That's good. What would you guys want doctors to know about your conditions?
I'm lucky. I've had pretty positive experiences with my doctors. But I think that sometimes doctors cannot take into account how frustrating things can be, especially for people who are diagnosed with things that they, hadn't experienced before. And then now it's a thing that they're being told they're probably gonna have to live with for the rest of their life, And this, I don't know, sometimes when I'm told it's like, oh, you just have to sleep more. I'm like, well, I'm in college, it's finals week, like it's just sometimes things like that is just like, maybe, I don't know, be cognizant of patients and their feelings. I don't know, because sometimes I just feel like it can be really frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to jump in here for a second. I feel like doctors either think that, it's either all in your head or you're, strong enough to beat it and doesn't affect you. Doesn't seem that there's much in between. What about you, Brandy?
I agree. I mean, I wish that they would be a little more empathetic, because if it was them or their family member or their child, they would fight to the end to get the treatment they need. As to where the women in our community, we're fighting just to be listened to. I mean, it's really a sad situation in our community because, and Stormy can testify to this because, and I'm sure she'll tell you the story, because, a guy can go in and a girl can go in. The guy's going to get the better treatment and the girl's not going to get anything. Why? We don't understand why they won't help the women in the community. They're still focused on the men. And in my personal opinion, I feel like the women bleed more. We have our cycles that never stop. So I think we deserve the same treatment that the men are getting. And I wish that they would, man up and, say, hey, we did wrong. Times are changing. We need to treat them equally.
Definitely agree with that. And I'm going to jump in here again. It's not exactly the same situation, but I have POTS. And even though 95% of people with POTS are women, it takes 3 less years on average for men to get diagnosed than for women to get diagnosed. I find that to be an insane statistic. What about you, Stormy?
Well, yes, what Brandy said, but I want them to stop looking at our numbers because, I mean, when you look at hemophilia, 0 to, I have to think for a minute, 0 to, gosh, my brain, either 1 or 2%, I think 1% is severe. 2 to 5 is moderate, and 5 to 50 is mild. That's a huge gap. But quit looking at our numbers, especially as women. If we come in and we say we're having a bleed, we're having a bleed, you know, or if we come in and say we're having issues, you trust us with our son to know his body, but you don't trust us enough to know our own body. And that is frustrating. You know, when I'm at the treatment center, my son's in one room as an adult, I'm in a room as an adult, and they're telling me milds don't get prophy, but he's over there getting in trouble because he hasn't been using prophy. It pisses me off, you know, and I stood up and I walked out. And I think just learning to listen, and I would much rather a doctor, nurse, whatever, say to me, I don't know the answer to that, but I am willing to learn. I am willing to research. And don't just call another doctor that knows nothing about it. Call the doctors that have helped women, you know, and just listen. Even when they listen, they dismiss a lot of times. So I don't want you to listen to just listen, but, you know, listen and do something. We're a team. We should be figuring these things out together. Yeah, sometimes maybe it does feel like it's in our head but we suffer with so many different things, and you're just trying so hard to grasp at a straw, and for somebody to just say, let's try this, let's try that. And you know, you've got these young girls that are coming up behind us, and, you know, their lives can be so different than ours. So let's do something, you know, to make those changes.
Definitely. So last question, what do you want the general public to know about your condition?
I think there are a lot of different types of epilepsy. Personally, it's just like generalized epilepsy, I guess you could call it. The way my doctor described it, he said, you know, epilepsy can be like seizures, and certain ones can be caused by like a certain part of your brain. That's why if someone has brain surgery, they might, you know, get rid of their epilepsy because they can target it to the certain part of their brain that's causing the seizures. But other people, it's just like generalized, because anyone can have seizures. Some people just have a lower threshold for that. So that's why I take the medicine to try to raise that threshold. So it's just not confined to one type of thing. Like there are tons of different types of seizures. I unfortunately have the tonic-clonic grand mal on the floor, you know, seizures. But I mean, there are other ones where it's like it might not even look like someone's having one, you know, you just kind of just looks like you're spacing out basically, you know. So there are tons of different types of seizures, types of, you know, causes for it, you know. It's not all confined to one thing, what you would think, you know, just like person, you know, having a big seizure and stuff. Then there are tons of different treatment types, you know. There are tons of new things coming. Like my dad's one of his friends, he's like a neurosurgeon or something, and they were doing this new thing with like a sensor that it's been working for people, that they put in the brain, and it like senses when you're about to have one, and it like sends a like stimulus or something, and it stops the seizure from happening. I don't know if I'm explaining that right at all, but it's like something like that. And it's like, so they're just, I don't know, there are like tons of different things. So it's just, you know, try not to let preconceived notions, I guess, like confine what your idea of it is into one box, because there are tons of different types, especially if you are like, this can go back to the question of like, oh, if you're like just getting diagnosed and stuff, like there are tons of different types and for everyone. So it's like, you're not just, you know, it's different for everyone.
Yep, definitely. What about you, Brandy?
I think I would want them to know that sorry, well, that we're not, we're not fragile like everybody thinks we are. Because, it's kind of sit the porcelain doll on the shelf and don't touch her. So I think they need to understand that we're not fragile. We're not gonna have, just bleed everywhere. And if we do, it's okay because we know how to fix that. But I also want to share for the women in the community to know that if they're having, periods longer, than 7 days, that they really should get checked for a blood disorder, because it's not normal, So I feel like there are probably more women that could be diagnosed, but they just think their cycle is normal because that's how it's always been, or that's how their family members were. And they don't know that they could, might possibly have a blood disorder and get it checked out. And so that's what I think I would like to share.
Awesome. What about you, Stormy?
Yeah, mine's along the same lines that people, you say I have hemophilia and they go, oh, that's where you will bleed to death from a paper cut. No, we won't. I bleed more from a hangnail than I do a paper cut. But we bleed longer, not faster, number one. And like Brandy, we're not fragile. We can live life. We can do things. And especially new mothers, I love to let them see my son who's out rock climbing and hiking and, just living life because they're terrified. And there's so much new treatment now and things that we can basically live a normal life. We have to do a little bit different sometimes, and we have to, stop and take some time. But I think that's with any chronic illness. And again, I just want society to know that women do have bleeding disorders. We don't just carry it.
Definitely. Do we have any questions from anybody? Feel free to speak up or put them in the chat or tell Mila. While we wait for questions, we can go over next semester.
Sarah, can I just say real quick too that Brandy and I are, very open. We share our story as much as we can. So if anything ever comes up with anybody, you're welcome to share our email address with them or, get in contact. They can get in contact with you and you can get us. We have really good relationships with a lot of doctors all over. So we can usually point you, to the right place or, answer as many questions as we can. So, that's something we really like to share, that we're here to help.
And feel free to shout out your socials while you're at it. I realized I didn't put it on the slide like I should have. It's VWD underscore hemophilia underscore sisterhood. Am I correct? Okay. Awesome.
It's VWD underscore hemo underscore sisterhood on face. Is that the face? No, that's Instagram. Sorry. Brandy's putting it in. And then it's Sisterhood for Women Who Bleed on Facebook, which that's just for women who has bleeding disorders. But if you're ever doing, a report or anything and you'd like to interview some people, you can always come through us and we can help you work on that. And then what else do we have? Is that it? We've been so busy. It's amazing. Yeah.
Awesome. Mila, do you want to go over this or should I?
Can you have like a little more information about these things?
Okay, true. So for our schedule for next semester, we're switching to Tuesday. It will still be at 7:30 p.m. And all the meetings will be in Zoom and in person, and our events are in person only. For February, we're covering gastric conditions. We're doing Crohn's, gastroparesis, and celiac. February 7th and 21st are our meetings for that, with the 21st having guest speakers. February 28th, which is Rare Disease Day, so we'll be talking about that. But specifically, we're doing a service dog event where we will be learning about service dogs, how you shouldn't interact with them, and what they do, and the differences between service dogs and emotional support animals. In March, we're doing autoimmune conditions, lupus, Sjogren's, and Graves' disease, the 14th and the 28th. For April, we're doing various conditions, so just assorted. ME/CFS, which is chronic fatigue syndrome, and ME, which I can never remember what it stands for, cystic fibrosis, PANS, PANDAS, and BGE. That's on the 4th and the 11th. And then we're doing a trivia night to wrap up the year on April 18th. And another follow us. Also, we were looking for board members for next year. So if you're interested, please scan the QR code and fill out the form, and we will contact you sometime early next semester to interview you and hopefully have you on our board. I believe that is it. Yes. So thank you very much to our guest speakers for joining us today. And Mila, unless you have anything else, I think that is all.
I'm good. Another thank you to all our guest speakers.
Thank
and,
you. Definitely.
Excited. Come back next semester. We'll be doing more fun stuff.
Yep.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys for coming.